My name is Carlin Burisenko, and you're listening to the Actively Unwoke podcast. For archives of the podcast, please visit activelyunwoke.com/podcast. And while you're there, I hope you'll consider supporting my work by heading over to activelyunwoke.com/support and signing up as a member on my Substack, on my Locals, on my Patreon, or making a one-time gift. I am completely funded by you, and I can't do it without you. Well, it's been a minute since I recorded a podcast, and I'm sorry about that. You know, in the winter, I get all sorts of ailments in the winter. I'm sure some of you experience the same thing, and my throat has been messed up in some form or fashion for another. It feels like for a whole month, but spring is here. We have entered what I dub, rather jokingly for people who lack a sense of humor, I dub it my Carlin's month of narcissism when we roll into Aries season, because I'm an Aries. My birthday is on April 12th, and I'm starting to feel better and I'm starting to feel more fiery, and I am back, and we have got so many stories to cover. If you are only a listener of my podcast, but you don't follow my Substack or my Twitter or my YouTube, and by the way, please follow me on multiple platforms because I really do different content on every single one of the platforms. There is some overlap. Sometimes I'll cover the same articles on the Substack as I'm doing on the podcast, or on the YouTube as I'm doing on the podcast, but there is also different content. So it's not just this one podcast if you've never explored my other platforms, but there has been so much going on. And today, and I'm actually covering this on the podcast first and not on any other platform, I want to read you an article from the Washington Post that is just an absolute white pill of a moment. For those who don't know the term, the white pill, that's when you see hope. That's when you can see perhaps a light at the end of the tunnel of all of this insanity that we have been surrounded by for years. It's the opposite of the black pill. The black pill is when you sink into a state of doom and despair at the utter insanity of the world. The white pill is when you realize that there is still a chance that we can turn this thing around. This is the headline that I read in the Washington Post this morning. Schools forced to divert staff amid historic flood of records requests. Districts are rushing to comply with complex queries as parents seek, quote unquote, transparency about what is taught. I have never been so excited to read a headline in the Washington Post in my life. What this means is that parents are doing what I and so many others have been encouraging them, begging them, cajoling them to do for years now. They are sending FOIA requests. They're sending public records requests. It's called a different name in the different states, but essentially what it means is you send a request to the school and you say, I want this information. And it could be about the files. The thing that I love to FOIA the most are their emails, because they always forget that their emails are public record and you are entitled to all that information. So you can literally send a request into your school and say, I want to see every single email from the principal of the school that has the term anti-racist in it, or equity in it, or diversity in it, or trans in it, or whatever words you want. I have a list of recommended words that I definitely recommend people look into, but that list changes all the time because the language changes all the time. Regardless, the moral of the story is that everything that goes on in the public schools is subject to FOIA requests, public records requests, and you are entitled to all that information. And it looks as though parents are stepping up and sending these requests to the school in such record numbers that it seems as though the schools are actually having to dedicate staff resources to fulfilling all these requests. I think that's a good thing. I think that is a feature. That is not a bug. That is a positive thing, because guess what? The more resources that these schools have to dedicate to fulfilling these FOIA requests, the less time they're indoctrinating your kids and getting into other nonsense that we're all going to have to undo later. Let's read this article. It appeared in the Washington Post on March 27th, so just a couple days ago. One Virginia school district added $500,000 to its budget just to process public records requests. Well, that's a little ironic, considering the people that ask for the records are obligated to pay for the records. Perhaps we'll get into that later. One Virginia school district added $500,000 to its budget just to process public records requests. In the span of 90 days this school year, an Arkansas school district received 100 such requests that cost nearly $20,000 and 400 hours of staff labor to fulfill. Bravo, parents! This is how we defund the schools. This is how it gets done, ladies and gentlemen. Because remember, every single minute that they spend fulfilling these FOIA requests and giving you the information that you are entitled to, they're not indoctrinating your kids or transing your kids or engaging in other tomfoolery and nonsense that they never should have been engaging with anyway. And in Minnesota's Owatonna, I'm sure I butchered that, public school system, Owatonna, that's how you spell it. I have no idea how to pronounce that. The 61-year-old director of human resources is still plowing her way through a request from the citizens group United Patriots for Accountability, which in summer of 2021 sought all school communications and records that mentioned 19 phrases, including Black Lives Matter, institutional racism, and whiteness. Whiteness is a term you should absolutely FOIA. That request has already consumed $165,000 of the district's money, and Director of Human Resources Chris estimates 2,200 hours of staff time, much of it drawn from her own weekends and holidays. I'm sorry, Chris. I don't feel bad for you. This is the job you accepted. She has generated approximately 170,000 pages of records and guesses it will take another year to complete the request. Well, guess what? That's not the fault of the parents who are requesting this information. Do you know whose fault that is? That there are 170,000 pages of information with terms like Black Lives Matter and institutional racism and whiteness. That is the school district's fault. No parent forced that school district to integrate whiteness into every part of the curriculum. No parent forced the school district to mention institutional racism in their emails and their personal communications so often that it led to 170,000 pages of documents that now have to be delivered. This is not the fault of the parents. This is the fault of the administrators and the teachers in the school district. And so the Director of Human Resources, an ironic title, given that it was quite literally the human resources of the school district that caused this problem in the first place, the Director of Human Resources, if he has a problem with it, he can go and talk to them. I am very tired, and I almost want to vomit when I hear the word redaction. Well, then don't redact anything, Chris, because it's public information. The taxpayers paid for this information, and they have a right to know what it says. School districts across the nation are facing a mounting pile of increasingly complex records requests from parents, community members, and attorneys representing education advocacy groups. Do you know what that means? It means the parents are understanding. If they're sending in complex requests, that means they've thought about it. They understand the terminology. I'm almost crying. I'm so happy. I can't even tell you. All of these groups say they want greater transparency about how local children are educated. Well, one would think that would be a good thing. The requests are expansive, with filers seeking hundreds of thousands of pages of school emails, lesson plans, and other internal documents, all of which must be carefully reviewed for student and employee personal information in compliance with federal privacy laws. Well, too bad, so sad. School leaders warn the resources are being diverted away from students' academics' need. At the exact instant America is facing a dropping of test scores, a teen mental health crisis, and a teacher shortage. No, 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 no. Do not allow the school districts to gaslight you. School leaders saying, you're just sending in too many public records requests and you are diverting our resources away from teaching your children. They aren't teaching your kids anyway. Do you know what they're teaching your kids? They're teaching your kids about gender and how to have sex with different types of people and anti-racist math and all sorts of foolishness. Okay, don't get me wrong, maybe that was a little bit of a hyperbolic statement, and I do like to be nuanced in my work. So I will say that there are good teachers out there who are teaching legitimate things, but there are also teachers out there who are spending all of their time on nonsense. So don't tell me that their good efforts are being diverted, because again, if you guys have so many files containing this information, then that means you're probably teaching nonsense in the first place. The spike in interest in schools records began during the coronavirus pandemic when citizens sought information on topics such as masking policies and district spending on safety measures. Since then, the focus has shifted to curriculum documentation, what? And the contents of emails, yes, between school board members, as concerns have spread nationwide over what public schools are teaching about race, gender, and sexual orientation. This has now become a sort of tool of choice for interrogating controversial school policies, says Margaret, a professor at Ohio State University who studies Freedom of Information Act and transparency laws. There is no national database tracking the number of public records requests sent to schools. Still, one company that offers request processing services has seen a 62% increase in the number of K-12 school districts signing up for its product since 2020. This company serves more than 700 state, county, and municipal governments and schools nationwide. School board associations, or heads of state public records associations in at least 8 states, including Kentucky, Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut, Virginia, Arizona, Colorado, and Minnesota, also reported an uptick. Some parents and freedom of information advocates said school districts have long needed to devote more resources to handling records requests so that mothers, fathers, and taxpayers can better understand their public schools. They pay for all of this. We pay for all of this. We are entitled to this information. I like seeing more I like to see more citizen engagement, says Megan, executive director of the Virginia Coalition for Open Government. To the extent that these people are demanding answers and wanting to know how things work in their local school district, I think that's a good thing. I would tend to agree with that, Megan. And this article goes on and on and on for a while. I'm going to link it in the show notes below. I don't want to spend time reading the whole thing, but I had to get on here and read a little bit of it to you guys because this is really amazing information. I've been feeling so down lately because, and I'm going to record a separate podcast on this. I really feel like, especially with the Nashville shooting tragedy of this past week, I feel like so many people are so distracted by things that aren't actually related to solving the problems that are in the schools. And I am more convinced than ever that schools are ground zero for these problems. If we do not fix the public schools, or completely, my preference to be quite frank, completely separate government and education entirely, these problems are never going to go away. And it seems as though the loudest voices that I'm seeing in the so-called anti-woke space, which usually tends to be the conservative right, but there are a lot of people that are in the anti-woke space that are not conservative. The loudest voices that I'm seeing are now focused entirely on trying to eliminate transgenderism. This has been deeply disturbing to me Because, to be quite frank, there are adult trans people who are just trying to live their lives, a lot of them that just want to be left alone to live how they want to live, and they're not doing anything wrong, and they're being demonized because of the far left activist wing of the trans movement. And I think it is such a distraction from the things that actually matter. Whether or not someone is trans has no bearing on what the schools are integrating into their curriculum. These are two completely separate issues. And yes, we can get into the topic of schools trying to socially transition kids. This is something I'm deeply concerned about, especially when it relates back to the GSA clubs, the gender sexuality alliances, things like that. Fact of the matter is, though, that social media is also doing a lot of the legwork for the far left in that respect, because school kids aren't just hearing it in the schools. They're then going home and getting on social media, and they're getting into Facebook groups. They're going on Tumblr. They're watching anime. Anime is a big entry point towards socially transitioning for kids. They're doing all of this stuff offline too that has nothing to do with the schools. Are the schools introducing some of these ideas in the classroom? Yes. Are the schools having after school clubs and activities where kids are being introduced to these ideas? Yes. Are the schools investing in teacher training that is teaching teachers and administrators to push these ideas onto kids and to normalize the medicalization of children? Yes, they are. All of those things are true, but none of those problems are going to be solved if the entire focus is on ending transgenderism everywhere, which, by the way, if you believe in freedom and individual liberties, you should be defending the right of adults to live how they want to live as long as they're not hurting anyone. So I've been a little bit, well, black-pilled lately at what's happened and the emphasis on that, and reading this article about how school districts are having to spend so much money and so many resources for filling good, complex public records requests from parents. That is such a white pill moment for me, because that shows that there are people who are still focused on the things that matter the most. I implore all of you listening to this right now that, listen, I fell into this trap. I fell into this trap a couple of years ago, probably in 2020 mostly, because I was still very new in this space and I was still learning. And I tried to solve every problem. And every single time a new fresh hell was introduced, I tried to solve it. And then that would distract from the other things I was working on. And it was just like, new problems are going to come up every single day. There are an unlimited number of problems to be solved. But you can't solve everything. And so you have to prioritize, and you have to hold yourself accountable. You have to make sure you're being honest about what actually matters and what doesn't matter. When it comes to ending the woke ideology, we are generations away from fixing this problem. This is not something that's going to happen in a couple of months. This is not something that's going to happen in a couple of years. This is not something that's going to happen in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, because it has been building up for at least 50 years. They have a 50-year head start on us. I want everyone to get really comfortable with the fact that this is not a problem that is going to be solved in any of our lifetimes. The only thing that we can do is focus our energies on what matters the most, on laying the groundwork, because that's the stage that we're in right now. We are in the stage of laying the groundwork, of organizing, of figuring out what this thing actually is and what they want, of starting to implement plans and tactics that cuts right through all the bullshit and all of the noise and focuses on the things that matter most. That's the stage that we're in right now. If people are running around getting distracted by all of the other things that don't cut right to the core of the problem. And the core of the problem is the public schools. It is the teacher pool. It is the administrator pool. It is everything surrounding state compulsory education in K through 12 public schools. If you are not focusing on things that are directly related to that and the curriculum being taught in the schools and the training programs that teachers are forced to undergo to indoctrinate themselves, by the way, because the entire teaching pool, almost like 90%, have been indoctrinated into this ideology too. If you are not focused directly on things that are going to solve that particular problem, then what you are focused on is a distraction, and we need to keep ourselves more honest about this. So, seeing this article in the Washington Post about schools being forced to divert staff resources at historic levels because of the floods of public records requests that parents are sending in, demanding their emails, demanding their curriculums, demanding the policy documents, demanding all the behind the scenes stuff that they are absolutely entitled to based on their taxpayer dollars. This is a massive white pill for me because it shows that there are so many people out there that are focused on things that matter. If you have never done a FOIA request and you would like to learn how to do one, you can find a free training on my website, activelyunwoke.com/on-demand. You can just go to the training bar in the upper menu on the website and you'll see Unwoke Trainings on Demand. And there is a free training conducted by Nicole Solis, who is a mom in Rhode Island that sent so many FOIA requests to her school district that the teachers' unions sued her to stop her from getting that information. And she will teach you exactly and precisely how to do a FOIA request. And that is available as a free resource on my website. So if you've never done it, that's a great place to start. But this is the way. This is the path that we need to go down. And I'm so proud of all of these people who are staying focused on the issue. Let's all take this as a moment to refocus because, listen, I'm guilty of this too. I still get distracted sometimes. I'm a human being. We're all human beings. We can all take breaks every once in a while and allow ourselves to, indulge a little bit. But we have to be honest about when we're doing it. We have to say, you know what? This is no longer useful. Let's focus back on the things that matter. Don't beat yourself up over it, okay? You're a human being. But if you don't end up refocusing yourself, that's when it becomes a problem. All right, guys, that's all I have for this episode. Take care, and we'll see you next time.